with you, the male and his female, of the animals that are not clean. Okay? So all they did, they just used the negative, lo, in connection to the term clean. And we're going to look at the word clean in a moment. It says, take two, the male and his female. Also of the birds of the sky, 7 and 7, male and female, to keep seed alive on the surface of all the earth. I'm not going to delve too much into the animals getting on the ark at this time. The point is to show that Holy Scripture, what they're doing in the Word, they are setting the animals apart. So let's go back. 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 5, which reads, for it is sanctified through the word of Elohim and prayer. Talking about the foods that we are permitted to eat. How does the word sanctify or set them apart? What we just read. The Most High himself, when he's given instructions to Noah to put these animals on that ark, he said there are some that are clean and some that are unclean. He said that. He determined that. We do not have the option to call anything clean unclean or unclean clean. He determines that. Why? Because, and I'm pointing to the board, I'm thinking about what I wrote on the other side. Basic instructions before leaving earth. This is what he has given. The Torah is our instruction manual. You want to live a good life? Live your life according to the instruction manual. Follow the directions that have been given. But what has happened, you have somebody to say, well, I got some direction too. You can live this way. Oh no, guess what? Well, I got some direction too. You can live that way. So you got all these people that's rising up and they say, we got directions as well. But they didn't come from the Most High. They may have bits and pieces of some of the truth of what the Most High gave to Israel, but they don't have the fullness or the totality of it. That's why, once again, the world is in darkness, the people's gross darkness. It's in a chaotic state right now as I'm speaking. Whenever you hear this, it's in a chaotic state. It was in a chaotic state yesterday, it will be in a chaotic state tomorrow, and it will remain in a chaotic state until Mashiach Yahushua comes and straightens all of this out. It's only going to get worse from here on out. The world and the condition that we currently live in. Let's move on. He says, again, you shall take 7 pairs of every clean animal with you. Now the word translated as clean, you can see up on the board, number 2889 in the Hebrew lexicon. The word is tahor, which means pure. Hence, purity. Okay? It means pure. It comes from 2891. That word is tahir, which means to be bright or to be pure. Alright? It says here, in regard to tahor, this word is used 99 times in the Old Testament, primarily to distinguish things that were culturally pure, capable of being used in or taking part in religious rituals of Israel. Now, as an example, we have Genesis chapter 8 and verse 20. And let's see, did I put that up there? I don't think I put that up there. Genesis 8:20, it says, Noah built an altar to Yahweh and took of every clean animal and of every clean bird and offered burnt offerings on the altar. Okay? So what it's referring to in regard to being used in or taking part in the religious rituals of Israel, it is referring to sacrifice. Okay? And for the word tahir, it says the term occurs most frequently in Leviticus, where it was used for ritual cleansing of either things or persons. Okay? So now, let's go to Genesis chapter 9. Now, Genesis chapter 9 takes place after the flood. Before the flood, Abba made the distinction. There are clean animals, there are unclean animals. Okay. Now, in Genesis chapter 9 and verse 1, it says, Elohim blessed Noah and his sons, and said to them, be fruitful, multiply, and replenish the earth. The fear of you and the dread of you will be on every animal of the earth and on every bird of the sky, everything that moves along the ground, and all the fish of the sea are delivered into your hand. In other words, you have the dominion. When he initially created Adam and Hawa, Adam and Eve, they were given dominion over all the earth. This same dominion is being reiterated to Noah and his sons. In verse 3, it says, every moving thing that lives will be food for you. Now, when you read that, people are going to get the assumption that they can eat everything. But we already see that the Torah has set apart what was determined to be clean and what was determined to be unclean. There's that understanding. Okay? It says, as I gave you the green herb, I have given everything to you. But flesh with its life, that is its blood, you shall not eat. Let me read that again. But flesh with its life, that is its blood, you shall not eat. Simple and plain. Okay? So we don't have that option to eat blood. And I'm saying this because you have some people, when it comes to eating meat or being a carnivore, they say that it's not good for you, etc., etc., etc. I'm not trying to get into that, but I do want to make this point. Heard a conversation one day. They were discussing eating steak, right? And what the best cooked steak would be. Now you have rare, you have medium rare, you have medium, medium well, and well done. Okay. Now, of course, the person who was talking about this, they said that the best cut or the best way to cook it is to have it medium. Now, some people like it medium rare, some people like it rare, just seared and still have that blood, etc., etc., etc. Now, when it comes to people who speak against eating quote-unquote red meat, what people don't realize, they literally mean red meat. Because you're not just eating the meat that's fully cooked. You're eating blood. And you're not supposed to do that. So whenever somebody speaks negatively in regard to eating meat, it's two things, or it's actually more than two things, but two things I'm going to mention at this particular time. One, are you eating the meat cooked? And even before you get to the cooking process, you have to clean the meat so that it has no blood in it. And then you cook the meat. Okay? That's number one. Eating the blood is problematic. The second problem when it comes to eating meat is overeating, overindulgence. We eat too much of it. That's why we have the problems. Okay? It's not that we can't eat meat, because here's the question. Why did Abba allow humanity to eat the flesh of clean animals? You have some people, whether they be Jews or Hebrews or Israelites, whatever they classify themselves as, they also have now instituted veganism / vegetarianism, etc. If that's something that you want to do, by all means, you can choose to eat that way. But what you shouldn't do, and we read that last week when Brother Shaul was talking about who are you to judge another man's servant. If the Most High himself has allowed humanity to eat certain meats, why would you say that we shouldn't be able to eat those meats? Unless, indirectly, this is an attack on the Torah. Okay? Indirectly, it is an attack on the Torah. Alright? So, the word translated as food in Genesis chapter 9 and verse 2, as well as previous verse we just read, Genesis chapter 1, 29 and 30. And that word comes from 402. That word is okla, which is food simply, and it's derived from number 398. That word is akal, which means to eat. Alright? Now, let's get into Vayikra, or Leviticus chapter 11, starting at verse 1. As we're going through these, this is dealing with the clean and unclean animals. Okay? Animals that we can eat, animals that we're not supposed to eat. Alright? Couple things. Let me just briefly mention the pillars of Bible study. Okay? Number one is about taking what we read literally. All right? As I mentioned a moment ago, the exception would be poetry and prophecy, which are written in symbolic language. All right? Number two, you also have similarities. So there are comparisons that we can make within the word. Okay, those comparisons can be terms that are used. Those comparisons can be different things that are being shown. Okay. Then you also have an allegorical or / metaphorical aspect when you may be reading a story, and even though we're reading a story and it could be a historical event, something that actually took place, but there's some symbolism even behind that. And then they're all wrapped up and tied together under the banner of spirituality, because the spirituality comes from the first pillar of understanding the Torah, which is the acknowledgement that all scripture is given by inspiration of the Most High. All right, I want to say that because as we go through and we see what it is that we can and cannot eat, we're going to just scratch the surface a little bit, and we want to see what else I was teaching us, because he's teaching us more than just what we can eat and what we can't eat. All right, so that being said, in Leviticus chapter 11, starting at verse 1, Yahweh spoke to Moshe and to Aaron, saying to them, speak to the sons of Israel, saying, these are the living things which you may eat among all the animals that are on the earth. So if it wasn't enough what we read in Genesis in regard to the Creator letting Noah know these are clean, these are unclean, as far as how you're supposed to separate them before they get put on the ark, he's telling Moshe what to tell to Israel. These are the living things which you may eat among all the animals that are on the earth. When it comes to our dietary needs, there are some, again, they believe we shouldn't eat any meat. But here's the question. Why would Abba allow it? Why? If it's something that we should not be doing. Okay? Some people use the excuse about, taking the life of the animal, But here's the reality. Everything that we eat at some point was alive. Because vegetation, before we chop it down and harvest it, guess what? It's alive. Everything that is, the earth in and of itself is alive. It's a living organism. That's why some even refer to it as the Mother Earth for that reason. It produces life. So everything, whether it be plant, whether it be animal, has life in it. But in order for us to consume it, we have to take that life so that we can receive the nourishment that Abba created for us, whether it be plant, whether it be animal. He says, verse 3, now he's going to give this is in the first one anyway, now he's going to give the criteria to determine what we can and what we cannot eat. He says, whatever, it says, parch the hoof. And now in Hebrew it says, mafreset parsa. And basically it's a play on terms because it's the same root or the same word, and we're going to get the definition of that in a moment. He says, whatever parch the hoof and is cloven-footed. Same thing. It's a play on terms because it says, weshosat sa'at, weshosa'at shesa. Okay? And then it says, that's the one. Parch the hoof and is cloven-footed, but they're saying the same thing, but it's using two different terms, and we'll touch on that in a moment. He says, and choose the cud, which is ma'alat gara, and choose the cud among the animals that you may eat. Once again, whatever parts the hoof and is cloven-footed, and choose the cud among the animals that you may eat. Okay. So they have to meet that criteria in order for them to be considered pure. Some people like to say kosher. All right. Now, let's look at these terms. Number 6536, the word paras. Now, the word paras is what forms the the first part, mafreset parsa. All right, paras. It means to break, to break. It said, or matter of fact, to break in pieces. That is usually without violence. To split, distribute. It describes the split that separated the structural feature of the hoofs of certain animals. Some animals were edible, some not edible by Israel. It refers to the dividing of the hoof as well as the hoof itself. It describes the sharing, the dividing of bread with those who need it, or to divide or solemnly break bread in the act of mourning. So depending on the context, of course, it determines. So the word parash, to break. Now the other term, where we get the, where shosa'at, shasa, that word is number 8156, and the term again, shasa, which means to split. It says to split or tear, figuratively, to upbraid. It means to pull something apart, to separate it wholly or partly. The animal that had a divided, separated hoof was edible for Israel. In Samson's great might, he tore and mangled a lion. It probably had the sense of to disperse, to separate, or to persuade. Keep these things in mind. Because when it comes to these two words, paras and shasa, they basically have a similar meaning. But he used two different terms. In other words, whenever you have terms that are similar in meaning and the Creator is using them to express the same thing, what we're actually being taught is he's doubling down on the importance of this separation. Okay? Now the next term, he says, and choose the cud. And that is two words, two different terms. Ma'alat gerah. So the first part, ma'alat, is derived from number 5927. The word is Allah, which means to ascend. Think about that. To ascend. But it's, again, he doubling down. Because, let me read this. To ascend. Intransitively, to be high or active, mount. Used in a great variety of senses, primary and secondary, literally and figuratively. This Hebrew word carries with it the connotation of an upward motion. In this context, it refers to the food that comes up. Now we're talking about the context of, ma'alat. Talking about bringing up the food, okay, to ascend. But the next word, garar, it says to bring up. That's one of the definitions. It said to drag off roughly. By implication, to bring up the cud, that is ruminate. By analogy to saw, and it's talking about to saw based on the sound that's being made. The idea of a noise made in the back of the throat seems to be the root idea, so that the word is onomatopoetic, like the English word gargle. The word is used once to signify rumination, an essential mark of a ceremonially clean animal. It described hostile forces dragging people away or catching them like fish in a net. The word also signifies sawing, as dragging a saw over wood. Now keep these things in mind, because the idea to ascend, to bring up, to break, to split. What is Abba teaching us? Now, he put these things, and what this actually shows, he put these different traits in the animals. Why? Let's go back to Acts chapter 10 and 11. The point that he used the unclean foods, okay, this was a vision. There's a scripture in Numbers. The Most High says, if there be a prophet among you, I will reveal myself to him in dreams and visions. Okay? The fact that he's using a vision shows that he's talking to a prophet. Okay? The prophet that we're referring to, of course, he sees a vision. In this vision, a sheet with unclean animals is shown to him. And it was brought down 3 times. Right after, there's a knock at the door. And there are 3 men who come from a Gentile nation. Okay? Abba is teaching us. It was a message for that time. But now when we go back to the Torah, and now when we go through the different clean and unclean animals, what we can also deduce from that is that these animals, now we're making a comparison. These animals are not just clean and unclean for the sake of our consumption or non-consumption for the ones we can't eat. He is giving us the traits of his people. What do we mean by that? Well, let's read a little bit first. Let's go to Leviticus chapter 11, starting in verse 4. It says, "Nevertheless, these you shall not eat of those that chew the cud, or of those who part the hoof. The camel, because he chews the cud but doesn't have a part of hoof, he is unclean to you. The coney, which is the hyrax, because he chews the cud but doesn't have a part of hoof, he is unclean to you. The hare, because she chews the cud but doesn't part the hoof, she is unclean to you. The pig, because he has a split hoof and is cloven-footed but doesn't chew the cud, he is unclean to you. Of their meat you shall not eat, and their carcasses you shall not touch. They are unclean to you." Now, we want to interject Devarim, which is Deuteronomy chapter 14, verses 7 and 8, because here he gives a little more information. He says, oh, matter of fact, let me go back up. Before I even read that, I need to go back up to Deuteronomy chapter 14 and verse 3 and read down a little bit, because whatever parts the hoof and is cloven-footed and chews the cud among the animals, that you may eat. He gives a list in here. This is Brother Moshe here in Deuteronomy speaking. And he says, "You shall not eat any abominable thing. These are the animals which you may eat: the ox, the sheep, the goat, the deer, the gazelle, the roebuck, the wild goat, the ibex, the antelope, and the chamois. Every animal that parts the hoof and has the hoof cloven in two, and chews the cud among the animals, that you may eat." Okay? Again, what is the significance of the split hoof being cloven-footed and chewing the cud? There's a reason why, but we'll get to it in a moment. Now to the ones that we're not supposed to eat. And going back to Deuteronomy chapter 14 and picking up in verse 7 again. He says, "Nevertheless, these you shall not eat of them that chew the cud, or of those who have the hoof cloven, the camel, the hare, and the rabbit, because they chew the cud but don't part the hoof. They are unclean to you. The pig, because it has a split hoof but doesn't chew the cud, he is unclean to you. You shall not eat their meat, and you shall not touch their carcasses." Now, let's talk a little bit, just a little bit. And we're almost done, because we're not going to do too much today. When it comes to the split hoof and being cloven-footed, now think about what it is. You're talking about what the animal walks on, right? So now you're talking about our walk. Okay? What's the indication there? There has to be a break, in other words. When we think about how we walk, Israel's walk, remember, Israel being called to holiness. Israel's walk is not going to be like the rest of the world's walk. There's going to be a separation. There's going to be a break, you see. And when you talk about the walk, think about it in the context of the walk of life. Okay? Think about it that way. Right? That's why, once again, he doubles down on it.